All right, welcome in for those that are joining us this morning. We are very excited to have you join us. And as you enter to our webinar this morning, feel free in the chat box to share where you are joining from. Good morning, Jocelyn. So we have someone joining from Comox. Beautiful area. In Chilliwack, good morning. Richmond, Victoria. Welcome. We have someone from Surrey. Good morning. Good morning from Langley. This is what's so lovely about having Zoom as our platform for our webinars now. The reach is wide, so it's lovely.
Yes, absolutely.
Hi, Judy. Welcome from Cobble Hill. Hi, Daphne. It is shining in Victoria right now. It's so lovely to see some sun. Oh, we have someone else from Richmond. Good morning. All right, so people are continuing to join in, so thank you. We're going to start right at 10 this morning because we have so much wonderful material and practices to dive into. And so this is the Mindful Self-Compassion webinar for caregivers, and I am your moderator. I'm Kate Landreth with Family Caregivers of British Columbia, and I'm the Education and Learning Lead with FCBC. And we have this morning Patricia Williams, who is our mindfulness self-compassionate teacher. She's also a clinical counselor, and she's also a registered art therapist. And we're so excited to have her here this morning. Welcome, Patricia.
Thank you, Kate. Delighted to be here, truly.
And I'll get you to click just to the next slide.
Why does it not want to let me? The need for compassion begins, Kate. I'm not sure why it's not advancing. There we go.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're new, I see actually a comment just for the webinar. I'll give you a little preface of how this works. So the webinar is live right now. It will be recorded, so you'll have a copy of the recording after. Everyone will remain muted and your cameras will be off. So right now you should be able to see both Patricia and I on your screen, and then I'll exit out and it will be just Patricia. You can see on the bottom part of your screen that there's a chat box that you can chat, and as you've done to share where you're joining from. There's also a Q&A feature. And you can type in your questions at any point during the webinar this morning. However, there'll be certain times that we'll return back to them to answer some of the questions, with the big chunk at the end to answer your questions. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge and thank the Lekwungen speaking people, also known as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nation communities. That's where I am this morning. And this is a community where we live and work and play on their beautiful land. So taking a moment to acknowledge the land that you live and play and work on here right now. Thank you. And a little bit about Family Caregivers of BC. So thank you for joining us this morning. We are a nonprofit charity that is 100% dedicated to supporting family and friend caregivers that are unpaid. And so our 3 pillars of our organization are caregiver support, and that's through our call line, through our support groups. We have caregiving coaching, and a lot of information and navigation of the health system and disease-based organizations where we refer out to those specific education pillars. Also, webinars is one key part of our education model. So we provide educational material here for you, and also through our new podcast, and our 2nd series is coming out soon. We have our newsletters and e-news, articles and blogs that you'll receive. And then our last pillar is engagement and collaboration, where we work to collaborate and bring the caregiver voice into our health system. So that is a little bit about us, and you can explore more also on our website. And I'll hand it over to you, Patricia. I look forward to hearing. And also, I had the pleasure of taking Patricia's 8-week mindfulness self-compassion course. And so I've learned firsthand the benefits of this practice and how important they are truly in my life. And I'm looking forward for your offering. So thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm just noticing on my screen, I still see 2 black screens for Family Caregivers of BC. So I'm not sure if that remains there, Kate, or not. Maybe they do.
Yeah, how's that now?
Yeah, they're just showing a black spot where your face would be, but not moving that. But I think we'll be okay. I'll read the slides as they come up anyway.
Okay, perfect. Someone just said that the screen seems fine on their end, so it might just be on yours for a moment.
Perfect. Well, that's great. Okay, well, welcome. And thank you, Kate, for the invitation. It's truly my pleasure to have an opportunity to talk about something so near and dear to my heart. And I wanted to, although I can't see each of your faces, I wanted to thank you for coming today, for making time, because I know you really do have to make the time and take the time, and that this is in a broader way, this is a time when the pandemic is rippling throughout the world, really, with impacts on not only health, but on almost every aspect of our lived experience, economic, political, all of that. So it's a time when the need for compassion for ourselves and for others is extraordinary. So thank you from that perspective as well. And thank you for the good work you do in making the lives of others better. Okay. I want to say as well, before we get rolling with the slides, that many of them are quite dense with information. So please don't try to read them and memorize. You'll get this PowerPoint on the website, as Kate mentioned. So you'll be able to go back and look at resources and refresh yourself with regard to the PowerPoint and the ideas. I just love this particular definition of mindfulness, even though there's a bit more to it, but mindfulness is about being fully awake in our lives, perceiving the exquisite vividness of each moment. And what goes along with that is accepting whatever is present without judgment. And that's one of the things we'll be practicing a bit today. We know, well, let me not get ahead of myself. That could happen. So what we'll talk about briefly is what is mindful self-compassion. We'll take a look at the research in general, but also focus in on why this is important to you as a caregiver. We'll look at the physiology of self-compassion, because it's not, you'll find mindfulness and self-compassion are not just ideas. When they're working, they're embodied experiences. So we want to take a look at how does self-compassion, and we'll also look at how does self-criticism impact the body. And then I want to make sure that we take time for these two particular practices. And both of these, they're 2 of 23 different practices that are part of the complete 8-week training in mindful self-compassion. We now have a shorter version as well that's 6 weeks. But these 2 are practices you can use on the go. So I'll talk about that throughout this. That's one of the beauties of self-compassion and mindfulness, the things that you can have in your back pocket when you need them, okay? And if there's time, I'll do a summary, but if we're running closer to the end, we'll skip the summary because it's all written down for you, and we'll go straight to the questions and answers. So what is this thing called mindful self-compassion? Before I tell you, and many of you may have already done some preliminary reading, but I wanted to point out, and this is a bit tongue-in-cheek, the problem with self-care. And of course, it's very important. Whatever your variation of self-care, good for you. Whether it's exercise, time with friends, bubble baths, massage, vacations, whatever it is you do, it's important. Why we say the problem with self-care is that much of what we consider self-care happens outside of the caregiving situation. And as the slide says, you can't say to the person you're with, whoa, man, this situation's a little too much, I'm going to go get a massage. We can't just, drop out of our role as caregiver. So we ask then, well, what can we do? What is it I can do? And you can calm yourself. You can bring yourself to a grounded place. You can offer compassion to yourself and the other person. And you can do that in the moment of giving care, in the moment that there's a struggle or a challenge of any kind. So we do have this decade of research. There's now well over 2,000 research articles on mindful self-compassion. So we know that it's associated with lower levels of things like anxiety and depression and stress. And it's also connected to much more likely outcomes in the domain of happiness, resilience, optimism about our future. So it's just linked to a overall better psychological health and well-being. So what is mindful self-compassion? Well, it's actually 2 things. And the first, when you hear MSC, or mindful self-compassion, it actually refers to this foundational 8-week program. So MSC is the name of a program, but it's also the name of the skills that you cultivate. So you come to have mindful self-compassion. Okay, so we're talking about both things. And the program itself is 8 weeks, 2 and 3/4 hours actually, plus a half-day silent retreat. And it's pretty comprehensive. It includes topics, discussions, exercises, meditations, and then there's real experiential practices of these topics, including formal and informal meditations, so seated, eyes closed, that kind of meditation, but also mindful practices that you do with your eyes open, and compassion practices that you do in the moment as needed, okay? And I put the reference here, the Mindful Self-Compassion workbook that goes along with the 8-week program, but many people are buying it just to sink in a little deeper to the ideas, even if they haven't done the training. So I'll leave that to you to explore. So the objectives of that program, we're going to try to do a smidgen of this today, is bringing down self-criticism, reducing anxiety, enhancing our ability to regulate our emotions. Key, really just a key piece. And then we also, in our culture, we've learned that if you watch sports at all, that the harsh coach is the one that gets things done, gets the highest level of performance. But in the program, we aim to find ways of motivating ourselves that are still highly effective, but done with kindness. Okay. The goal of the program is also to support you with challenging relationships. But the one I've bolded there, you'll notice, is reduce the risk of compassion fatigue and burnout. And I'll talk a little later how compassion fatigue is fading now as the term, and we're replacing it more with empathy fatigue. Okay, but we'll talk about that in a bit. But as caregivers, reducing the risk of that emotional exhaustion, whatever we call it, and the burnout that can sometimes come along is a key part of the program. So as I already said, MSC is also what we call the resource that you're cultivating, the resources, the insights, and the practices that we hope you take away, right, from the program. And so today, likewise, my goal is that you'll walk away with at least 2 of these practices. And the goal being that when you're struggling, that's when you offer these mindfulness, the self-compassion. So I like to think of it as the friend that's there when things really get tough. Not the fair weather friend that like wants to be around for just the joyful times, but that deep, good friend that you can call on when things are really, you're slogging through life, we'll say. So that's the strength that I believe mindful self-compassion can offer. So, wow, I just sprung that on you. I meant to give you a moment. So what happened when you see that sad little face? What's going on within you at this moment? And since you're all silent, all muted, just what would be the sound you would make if you saw this little babe in your kitchen? And what would you be thinking and feeling? What would you want to do? And for most of us, and in fact, universally, the sound of compassion goes something like, "Aw," because we're feeling the suffering of this little being, and we'd want to ease their suffering. So this universal sound of compassion, the urge to ease the suffering of this little babe, right? And that's what compassion is. We notice someone is suffering. And just as your heart probably reached out to that little one, we suffer with them a bit. And then we offer kindness. And we offer understanding. Even when the person may have brought that suffering on to themselves, because we recognize that suffering and failure and imperfection, that's part of our human experience. We've been there, and that's why the judgment isn't present in true compassion when we offer it to another. And so there's many ways of thinking about it. If that's compassion, then self-compassion means acting the same way to yourself as you do to others, the same way you would to a dear friend who had just backed her car into somebody's car in the parking lot, we'll say, or whatever the issue is, whether it's a disappointment with ourselves or with life, we turn toward ourselves with that same kindness that we would to someone else. And rather than that stiff upper lip or that, avoid or deny our suffering, we actually turn toward it and ask and acknowledge the suffering. This is hard, this is difficult, and what can I do right now? What do I need right now? And that, according to Kristen Neff, and the research seems to support this, there's 3 key elements in self-compassion. Self-kindness, we just talked about, turning toward our pain with that warmth and kindness that we would if it was anyone else in pain. We have a sense of our common humanity, and I'll say more about this later, but there's a peculiar thing that happens when life isn't going the way we want, or we've let ourselves down. We have this strange feeling of being alone, or I'm the abnormal one. There's something wrong with me because my life is this way. Look on Facebook and Instagram, everyone else is having a perfect life. What's wrong with me? And it's a lonely place to be. And so this element of self-compassion just reminds us everyone suffers. Everyone, I'm not alone in this. And then mindfulness, that beautiful capacity that we're aiming to develop that allows us to be aware and accept what's present. I keep losing my little arrow. Here we go. So the first component of self-compassion, as I said, is self-kindness. But each one of these lovely elements has a dark side. So you might have guessed what's the dark side of self-compassion or self-kindness, and that's self-criticism. And I don't need to say too much about that because every human being I've ever met knows what self-criticism and self-judgment is and how it feels. So in turning toward our suffering with kindness, we're not denying it, okay? We're really, truly acknowledging that it's present. And I just spoke about this, so I won't say too much more. In self-compassion, we look at our common humanity. We're in this together. We're all in the same boat. Not, I'm the only one not leading a perfect life. I'm not the only one that isn't the best caregiver ever created, okay? And then mindfulness includes this element of non-judgment. It's dark cousin over there, over-identification, or avoidance. Avoidance is just what it sounds like. We're creative beings, we humans will find 1,000 ways to avoid feeling really hard feelings. So that's just a natural tendency to avoid them. Mindfulness invites us gently back to say, well, actually, guilt is present. Anger's passing through me. This feels a bit like shame. Whatever the difficult emotion is, mindfulness invites us to welcome it, but not over-identify with it. And that's the kind of thing where we go quickly from, I'm angry, oh, it's wrong to be angry, I must be a bad person because I'm angry. We're identifying with the difficult emotions so much that we aren't separating. We don't have this ability to separate from the emotion itself. So this is a later addition to the subject of mindful self-compassion, and self-compassion in particular. People, if I had asked all of you, I wish I could have, I might have said, what do you think it is? And often we think of compassion as soft. And it is comforting, being with ourselves, soothing, validating. And it is all of those things. But there's a yang side. And I think for you as caregivers, this is also really important to know that the yang side is the acting in the world, the protecting, providing, motivating ourselves, advocating for ourselves, for what we need in order to continue to do the work. So it's both. That's all. It is the nourishment you need, that yin side, so you can find the courage and the strength to go out into the world and get what's needed. As poet Joan Halifax said, we need a strong back and a soft front. So just to summarize that first little bit, and I'm watching our time and it seems like liquid. It's flowing so quickly here this morning. I hope I'm not talking too fast. I've asked dear Kate to please give me a little nudge if I am. But the basic idea is it involves these three elements: kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. And another way of thinking about it, as if it's something you want to cultivate, to grow in yourself, is it means being and aiming for a state of loving, connected presence. Okay, loving, the kindness part, connected, the common humanity part, and presence, that mindfulness, the ability to be with whatever is arising for you, internally or out in the world. So the research, I've spoken to some of this already, so I'm going to flip through the research fairly quickly because it'll sit there for you to review and look up resources, articles, journal articles, and books after. But essentially, the biggest overview of it all shows the same thing. If our self-compassion is low, we have more psychological challenges. If as we grow self-compassion, our mental health, well-being improves. So that's the sort of big overview. We also have better relationships, that sense of social connection, and also this life satisfaction, or you'll see it sometimes written as quality of life. It's a measurable aspect of our being that is empirically measurable. So we know that these practices are standing up to research and proving their benefits. So in addition to those things, it also is showing up really powerfully in the whole domain of body shame, self-worth, our basic sense of self. We come to a more positive sense of who we are with all the imperfections, okay? With all the challenges, we develop a kinder view of ourselves. And then again, for caregivers, this idea that we're motivated toward a healthier lifestyle. Instead of, as a caregiver, sometimes culturally we've been trained to put ourselves last. And in what we see in the research is, gosh, we're getting people who are under the demands that you are, and still choosing to find a place for exercise and good food and, you know, whatever supports their well-being and health. And then, of course, the big one, reducing this risk of burnout and fatigue. And the Dalai Lama says, for someone to develop compassion towards others, first they must have, I can't read my screen, but you can. It's a little bit blocked here, but that idea that you must have the ability to cultivate compassion, and that requires you to connect with your own feelings. So that's the not avoiding, and to care for your own welfare. So I'm sure you know this already. Caring for others requires caring for yourself. And there's a lovely book called The Circle of Compassion, if you should ever want something to read that's nurturing in this regard. And Gail Straub says, what we have compassion for within the self, we can have for outside of the self. What we reject in the world, we also reject in ourselves. So we can't ignore the suffering of others. And I know you don't because of the work you do, but we can't ignore that suffering because they're part of us. And if we do disconnect from the suffering of others, we disconnect in ways from ourselves. So all by way of saying this notion of mindfulness and self-compassion is really key. But the question, how do you do it? How do you care for others without losing yourself? A little bit more research here that shows. So this, let me just preface this, sorry, this research is now from just the short course. So that's 6 one-hour sessions for people in the healthcare community. And we're still seeing pretty significant results from that very shortened program. We're still seeing lowered stress levels, which leads to this greater well-being. We're seeing less empathy fatigue. And when you get less of that, then you get less burnout. So that's why I think it's important for all of you. It's a proven way, right, of supporting yourself that doesn't have to take hours and weeks and months. These are short practices that can be cultivated. Just give you a little more proof of what I'm saying. And I apologize if you can see those things popping up on my screen. I'll be able to close those. Yeah, so the studies, I don't think I'll go into this too much more. What I haven't said is if you're a caregiver with lower levels of self-compassion, and women typically have lower levels than men, and we're typically called into the role of caregiver, not exclusively, but there tends to be a lot of women in that role, that you will benefit even more than someone with high self-compassion already. So these trainings, we see even greater benefits if you are someone who has lower levels. And the other thing I hadn't mentioned is something called secondary traumatic stress. So even if you haven't had the traumatic experience of the person you're caring for, and that can be medically, medical interventions that are necessary, can still have an element of trauma, right? So when we are empathizing and resonating and caring for someone who's had trauma, we can get what's called secondary traumatic stress. And what we find is these practices help reduce the risk of that. So it's not just burnout, it's also this secondary trauma. And this is just what burnout is. You already probably know this. Too much stress, emotionally intense work, and not enough resources. And how wonderful that you're part of an organization whose primary goal is to help you get the resources you need. And mindfulness and compassion, self-compassion, are two more of those resources. So we see those same results here when we bring compassion as a prevention of burnout. We know it's prevalent among caregivers. So, and we know now we've got empirical evidence that we can reduce that risk. The other thing that's really important, I think, is compassion satisfaction. And that means that we, rather than getting emotionally depleted, we end up cultivating a sense of satisfaction in what we're doing. We get a sense of personal accomplishment. I'm helping another human being, or more than one. This work is good. This is important, what I'm doing. And that buffers us against burnout. And we know that as we grow our own self-compassion, we actually have more compassion to give to others. I think I'm just noting our time, and I'll mention just two more bits of research. So for those of you, and I'm not sure how many of you are caregivers of your partner, we do know that there's a higher risk for depression and reduced quality of life and other things when you're in that intimate relationship and providing care. And so depression being one of them. What we see when self-compassion is brought in, and this is research again, when caregivers in those situations receive the training, they not only we see the depression come down and the stress come down and the quality of life go up, but we also see them taking better care of their own health. So they begin to keep their doctor's appointments more, they exercise more. So we see that, again, those things are both good for that depressed mood that can come when you're in that intense situation. And plus, they bounce back faster from whatever stressors happen. And we know, especially in this time of pandemic, when you're a caregiver, there's almost everything you go to do is more difficult right now. There's barriers. So, but what we find is that you have this capacity to kind of bounce back. Okay, right. Of course, I have to wear a mask everywhere. And of course, I have to sanitize my hands. And of course, there's layers of difficulty in so many areas of life. But we navigate those just with greater ease. So developing self-compassion in the partner who's the caregiver actually improves outcome for both the person they're offering care to and for the self. Same with yoga. When we combine traditional compassion meditation, loving kindness meditation with yoga, we see very similar results. In this one, it's important, I thought, that vitality actually increases. And that's really important because all of you have the same workload as every other person, but you've now also got the caregiving role. So I believe you can use more vitality. So daring to give yourself the care you give to others. And as I said, women just in general have lower levels of self-compassion. So if we can sort of get this cultivating mindfulness and self-compassion for women, will kind of counter that gender bias, right? So that's one of our goals as well. So yeah, I think we'll still take a minute to talk about this. I said I would. So if you're like me and everyone else, I'm sure you think empathy is a good thing, and it is. Okay, empathy is a key part of being a caring human being. So it enters into that social domain. Compassion and empathy are both part of that social domain. But there's two ways that empathy can operate. So when you're with someone who's suffering and you just keep resonating, your mirror neurons fire, that means you feel a version of the pain that they're feeling, whatever it is, physical, emotional, whatever it is. Our brain fires so that we feel that pain. It actually hurts us to see someone in pain. And that's a good thing. It's a messenger. It says something's not right here. But if we stay in empathy and only in empathy, and we're trained to do this, right? We feel their pain, and we enter into what's called empathic distress. We end up turning away, pulling away from that person because it's just part of our own survival mechanism. The emotion that comes to be associated with it is stress, which is uncomfortable, negative emotion. And then that's where we start to head towards burnout and the poor health that's associated with that. So we withdraw. So the good news is you don't ditch empathy, but we shift, we have the empathy, and we shift then into what is actually a different part of the brain. Compassion lights up a different part of the brain. Feels and looks a lot like empathy, but it adds another layer. And part of that is, instead of being concerned with our own suffering as we're entering empathic distress, we can stay present. We're feeling for the other, just like you did with that baby, right? Oh yeah, I feel for that pain. We keep that concern and that focus on the other person. And then these feelings that come up are positive, not so much stress. There's some of that, of course, but it's more about this desire to help. A key feature of compassion is I have this desire to alleviate the suffering. I see you, I know you're hurting, and out of that love is this desire to help. And people who cultivate compassion and practice from that compassion for others and compassion for self end up with better health outcomes in general. And they're able to go back again and again, that pro-social. They can keep returning to the caregiving role because they haven't been emotionally depleted by that just resonating. I hope that's making sense.
I'm just going to pop on because I just had some really good feedback. So yes, that
Great.
was really resonating with people in terms of that speaking to empathy and compassion.
Great, great. So knowing that there are actually two different areas of the brain is pretty interesting. It got my attention when I read that. So neuroscience, we can map it, and we can train people in empathy, and we can train people in compassion, and different areas of the brain light up. And if you're only resonating in empathy, it has a negative effect. And as I've said, and on the other hand, the positive impact of compassion training is more resilience for you as the caregiver and increased coping, which I think is, yeah, that's what you're looking for. And of course, as I've said, good news, compassion can be learned in only a couple of weeks. And that I found quite interesting too. This is a different research project, but in only a couple of weeks of training people in loving kindness, and that's bringing to mind people sending out, cultivating feelings of benevolence and love and good wishes for others. With only a few weeks of practice, we saw the brain actually change. So we know that when neurons fire together, they wire together. So the brain actually changed in structure, and that's what accounts for these improved mood and resilience, and this idea of true altruism. So it's not doing good for someone else because of what you'll get out of it. It actually generated this deep desire to add to the well-being of another human being or other human beings. So just a couple of weeks, and folks had greater compassion for the distress of others without that risk of just becoming depleted. And so, yeah, we want to learn to recognize the difference between those two things, empathic distress or compassion, because it's a way that you can continue with the work you're doing, with that caregiving role, without burning out. I hope I'm not talking too fast. Let's see. I think I'm going to skip over this section. It's really interesting, but I think I'd like to go to our practices, and we'll come back to this if there's time. And this physiology of self-compassion and self-judgment is what I was talking about earlier, truly impacts the body. So we're going to skip ahead to a practice, and then out of that, you may have some comments or questions about how it impacted the body. So just, you might want to close your eyes while I skip ahead. I'm not sure. That could be a little dizzying here. Oh, we weren't so far off actually. So for the self-compassion break, this is a practice that I'm going to lead you in, about a 5-minute practice, but it's one you'll be able to do on the fly. You'll get it down to less than a minute. And in fact, you may only do parts of it at times, but it's a key informal. It's not one of the formal practices of self-compassion training, but it's in your back pocket kind of training. So I will invite you to get comfortable. And if it's comfortable for you to close your eyes, I'd invite you to do that, or just take a soft gaze downward. And I'm going to be saying a series of phrases, but if at any point it gets to be a bit too much, you're feeling like, whoa, well, the big surge of emotion, I don't really want to go there, feel free to just open your eyes and distract yourself, make your to-do list, doodle, whatever, till we call you back. If it's a mild level of distress that comes up, and I'm going to actually ask you to think of something distressing, try to be with it. Try to just do that mindful practice where you say, okay, all right, this is what's here. Okay, sadness is present. Okay, try to be with it, but if at any point, just emotionally close, open your eyes, wiggle your hands and toes, and drop the practice. Okay, I hope I haven't scared you off. So it's called the self-compassion break, and I would invite you, if you haven't already, to really notice the chair that you're sitting in, or wherever you're seated or lying down, however you are. Notice that you're being supported. Okay, beneath you, that surface that you're on, beneath that the floor, beneath that the earth itself holding you, gravity pulling down the earth, supporting you. So just a couple of, maybe 2 or 3 deep breaths where you're filling your belly completely and then exhaling through your mouth, if that's comfortable, really exhaling all the air. So 3 breaths at your own pace. Then letting the breath just find its own rhythm. And just, as best you can, relaxing. And this break is something you can do anytime that you need a little self-compassion. But to practice it, we have to summon a little suffering, okay? A little bit of struggle here. So thinking about a situation in your life right now that is difficult, okay? It's difficult for you. It could be stress. It could be that you're feeling stress. It could be a relationship issue, something you're worried about, or something you're concerned might happen. So thinking of something that's difficult, but not overwhelming. Okay? So don't think about a child of yours, for example, because they tend to elicit a little bit too much emotional activation. So anyone else or any situation, and really try to feel into it. Really get in touch. What's going on? What's happening? What's happened? What might happen? What is it that makes this difficult? Who said what? So really bring it into your mind's eye and really feel a bit into the emotion, the stress or struggle or suffering that's there. And now I'm going to say a series of 3 phrases, and they're designed to help us remember those 3 components of self-compassion. Okay, remember I opened with talking about those. So the first phrase, this is a moment of suffering. And feel free to use whatever words work for you. This might be a moment of struggle or difficulty. Okay? But this is a moment of suffering, right? And we're bringing mindful awareness, okay? That component of mindfulness. We're bringing awareness to the fact that suffering is present. So you might say, this is really hard right now. I'm really struggling. Whatever language works for you, we're turning toward our difficulty, acknowledging it, naming it. This is a moment of suffering. And then the second phrase, suffering is a part of life. Okay? We're reminding ourselves of our common humanity. That second component of self-compassion. Suffering is a part of life. And again, language that works for you, okay? You might say it's not abnormal to feel this way. Many, many people are going through this right now. I'm not alone. The degree of their suffering might be different, the flavor might be different, but actually suffering and struggle is a part of life. It's a part of being human. I'm not alone. And the third phrase, may I be kind to myself in this moment. And I like to ask it as a question. How can I be kind to myself in this moment? What do I need? And if you haven't already, I invite you now to bring one or both hands over your heart and allow yourself to feel the gentle pressure of your hand or hands, the warmth. Really sense, let your awareness settle into the heart area and the warmth and touch that's present. And letting your hands support this idea of bringing kindness to yourself. Letting that kindness actually stream through your fingers. And you're welcome to find another place on the body that feels supportive if the heart doesn't work for you. The belly, putting your arms as if you're hugging yourself, whatever works. And then again, may I be kind to myself. What do I need right now? And you might use the kind of language and the tone that you would use with a dear friend who was in this same situation as you've brought to mind. And you might say something like, I'm here for you. It's going to be okay. Or, I care about you. I love you. Some folks use a diminutive like sweetheart. I got your back. I'm here for you. Okay. So whatever really important, whatever feels natural to you, and you'll play with this, I hope, in the coming weeks and find what words really support that deep wish that you be kind to yourself in this time of struggle. And then with your eyes still closed or gazing downward, I'd invite you to let go of the practice and really take another moment to check how your body is feeling. What's present for you? What sensations, what emotions? And allow whatever is there to be there, whatever it is. It could be softening and it could be resisting, but whatever it is, letting it be there. And then as you're ready, bringing your awareness back to the room that you're in, and gently opening your eyes, maybe rolling your shoulders a little. Yeah, whatever you need to kind of bring your awareness now back to this beautiful circle, this virtual circle of caregivers that we've created. Yeah, so that's the self-compassion break. Knowing that you can do that on the spot. As I said, I sometimes only bring my hand to my heart and already I've got it. It's like, yeah, this is hard. I'm not alone. And what do I need right now? So you'll get it so that you can sit with it as a practice and you can pull it out in a moment's notice. So I think I'd like to check in with Kate right now as to how we're doing time-wise. And yeah, I notice it's later than I thought. So I'm wondering if we should open it to questions now then.
Yeah, that would be great. And thank you. That was really, really meaningful. And I'm sure, if you'd like to share your experience with doing that self-compassion break in the chat box, feel free to give your feedback. And maybe this is something new for you, or maybe it's something that you already practice, but maybe in a different form. So feel free to share your experience. We did get a few questions in. The first question was from someone that it was when you were talking about self-compassion training. So someone had asked, what is compassion training, which I think you gave a good experiential example of, but maybe you can give a quick little note on that.
Mm-hmm. So in the specific research, they were using loving kindness meditation, which is a very ancient practice that we've now brought into modern life. And it's a process, that specific one is a process of bringing to mind in ever increasing circles the repeating wishes of goodwill. May you be peaceful. May you be free from suffering. There's a lot of variations, but it's a direct practice of cultivating compassion, ultimately including the self in that circle. But mindful self-compassion as a training is also compassion training. So we use 23 different practices. So it's, but it's all aiming to cultivate mindfulness so that you know when suffering is present, and then you have resources, inner resources to deal with that suffering, whether it's your own or someone else's. Rather than allowing the brain to do what it likes to do, attach to the emotion and avoid it or become overwhelmed by it. So I'm trying to say a lot in a short amount of time, but just to know that we can train compassion and it's different than empathy.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I think it you laid it out really nicely in your webinar today. Just that it is a process. It's like building that mind muscle, really, of training yourself, because sometimes we don't go to that self-compassion automatically. It is something that we need to learn how to do.
Absolutely, and 80%, almost 80% of the world, the population, has greater ease offering compassion to others.
Right.
If you're one of those, you're in good company. Most of us find it easier to offer to others. So part of mindful self-compassion is uh, making that balance, making that a little more balanced, that we know when we are suffering and we know how to bring soothing and support. And yeah.
I have a few, I predicted that this might be some questions that come up, and because of COVID right now, and obviously the struggle with long-term facilities and family being in there, and not always having access to see them, which is I just want to acknowledge how hard that has been for caregivers. We hear it a lot. And so questions around how to accept that and not being able to see the person that you care for or family members because of COVID. Someone's asking for a solution. I don't know if we have that solution today for you within the context of this webinar, but maybe about that accepting point of things that we might not be able to change right now.
Yeah, and that's a extraordinarily important question. And I want to say two things. One is, we don't offer compassion to ourselves to get rid of suffering. And I didn't say that earlier, but I'll say it again. We don't actually bring compassion to ourselves to get rid of the suffering. We bring it, we practice it because we're suffering. Okay? It's because we're in pain that we bring this compassion. We know when we are with someone who's grieving, for example, we cannot make it all better, but we can be there. We can sometimes make a cup of tea, but so it's hard to, I know it might seem like a subtle distinction, but we can't, there's much of life we can't control and we cannot fix, but we can cultivate the ability to bring kindness. So I too have children and grandchildren that I haven't seen in a year because of COVID, and that would never have happened before. And so I, oh, I can hear and feel that suffering. Certainly in I'm going to dip into solutions just for a moment, but using technology has been probably a saving grace. But I know now with a loved one in care as well in Alberta, she's not able to use Zoom or any other technology to have that sort of face-to-face. So I'm not sure if that's answered the question. When we are compassionate, it isn't that we've stopped feeling the pain. So acceptance isn't a cold detachment from the pain of separation. The pain of separation is alive and well in my heart right now for those I can't see. All right. And no amount of practice will take the pain away. But what I can do is be with it with kindness, not avoid it, not numb it, not exaggerate it, but just be with it. And amazingly, that helps you feel better despite not taking away the suffering. I fear I've talked too long on that topic, but it's such a core question. So I thank whoever it was that raised that.
Yeah, thank you for speaking to that. Another question that came up was, what if that I think it was the third question, what do I need right now, leads to more frustration since it might not be available or doable? What would you recommend for that?
Yeah, ooh, that's a really good question. I would say ask the question again, but first, here's what I would do. This is off the cuff, I don't know, but first I would go, yeah, what I need is another 24 hours to do everything. Okay, and that's to be kind of like frustrated, right? So then what I would say is, okay, all right, sweetheart, you need another 24 hours, and I'm really sorry, you can't have that in your back pocket. So you've got to somehow manage too much to do and not enough time. So given that, what do I need? So I might, if I really listen, this is what I didn't get a chance to emphasize. But when you ask, how can I be kind to myself, or what do I need right now? It might just be to be mindful and kind and compassionate about what you can't have, the first answer. But then in this moment, okay, then fine. What can I do? And it might be call your best friend. It might be step out onto the grass in your bare feet and shake it off, whatever. So the answers, this is one of the most surprising things for me, and continues to be. When I listen for the deeper answer of what do I need right now, it's often surprising, and it can be subtle and it can be small, but it can make a big difference. So try to acknowledge the frustration that you can't, give it a minute or two, and then just gently ask again. So then what else might I need?
I love that. And that's actually when I was practicing as you were guiding, similar to the person that asked what I needed, I couldn't get. It wasn't attainable. So asking again, that's a good technique, and maybe even 2 or 3 times to really kind of dial it in to that simplicity of where it might be accessible.
Yes, and not forgetting to bring the compassion and kindness in again for that secondary pain of, and I can't have it. I can't have that big one. Yeah, but I like that, dialing it in. Yeah, what is available? What can I do? Yeah.
There was a question. So first of all, I just want to say lots of people chimed in to say thank you. That's the mindfulness self-compassion break was very either emotional or just let them tap into themselves, and they really thanked. One person was just asking about the course that you're describing. I know that you're offering a course to caregivers right now. Is that something I can provide a link for people?
Yeah, absolutely. It will be in the new year, and we're just truly in the last 2 days nailing down some dates and times. So I'll get that to you within, like, you'll have it up within a week, but it will be, the next one will be in the new year. There'll be a couple of offerings, the 6-week one, and then a longer one that involves some creative expression. I didn't get around to talking about that, but yeah. So I'll pass that on to you, Kate, but then I'll also put it on my website. So it's not quite there yet, but.
Okay. I'm just mindful of the time. And that it just someone asked if that's free. It is a paid, offering, correct? Or
Yeah, the 6-week is, but we always consider requests for reduced rates. So.
Great. And there also is, I know in the resource page that we did provide, that there is websites and places for these wonderful practices that you can do as well online. So
yes, thanks for saying that, Kate. Yes, indeed. And the self-compassion break is actually narrated on Kristen Neff's website. So I tried to keep it very close to that one, so it would feel familiar when if you choose to refresh on Kristen's website.
So I guess I'm looking at the time. I know there's one more question, and I'm going to get to that in just a moment, because I want to be mindful of the people that are joining and that you have limited time. And so I just put in the chat box, there's a survey that we truly do appreciate your feedback on these webinars, not only to just understand how you experience this, but also to inform our upcoming webinars, because we want it to be relevant and meaningful for you. So if you can take the time, you'll also get a follow-up email tomorrow with that link, as well as the resources that Patricia has provided us. So at the second is the resource link. So we thank you for participating today, and to hopefully just trying on maybe a new practice and learning some different things that might support you in your caregiver journey. And lots of people are saying thank you, Patricia, as they pop out. There's one more question, because I think it actually is very meaningful, but can you speak a little bit more to the secondary traumatic stress And would it be comparable, they asked, to secondhand smoke in a medical situation? This person has struggled for years that they couldn't allow themselves to feel the same suffering as their partner, as they are the one with the disability, and it continues daily. So the question is, how could I drop the guard of positivity, even though it's indeed very hard some days?
Hmm. The guard of positivity. So always being upbeat around this partner with the disability. Am I understanding?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the second part. The first was, talking more about secondary traumatic stress.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then yeah, I think it was that this person that they're caring for is suffering, and maybe being the optimistic person of needing to keep up that energy or positivity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, secondary traumatic stress, it is real, and I would say if you're thinking that you might actually have that, it would be worth speaking with a professional. Are you having flashbacks? Are you having waking up in the night? Are you having high levels of anxiety? And so that would be important to know if it is. But we also have sort of lower grade variations of that, where we're suffering because of the suffering we're witnessing. And I don't, without knowing the situation, I'm a little bit hesitant to say, to change anything in your interaction with your partner, but that there can be no harm coming to you from deepening into your own self-compassion practice, because that will actually fill your cup with compassion for your partner. So you won't have to be pretending perhaps as much. You'll actually be able to I mean, again, I'm so hesitant to advise, but it's possible that then, as you have filled your own cup with kindness, that that it could even open the door for a little more acknowledgement that you see the suffering and you wish it weren't so. And if you can get into the compassion realm instead of the empathy realm, you'll start to be able to say, and look, I've done something good here. I have satisfaction in this role I've played as being the cheerleader for all these years. You'll that energy is not like the energy of traumatic stress. It's energy of, it's not perfect, but I'm doing something that's benefiting another human being that I love. So I hope that.
Yeah, I think that, like, taking care of someone else and taking care of self, I think like that, teasing that out. And I know from my experience in your program is, the self-compassion and the mindfulness work sometimes brings up things that you might need to then turn to a clinical counselor or a social worker to maybe do deeper work around that kind of more cognitive or behavioral therapy. But knowing that they're two different things, is that we're not getting into that deep figuring out work as we're doing the practices, but we can acknowledge it. And then, if it is available, that you could do, separate. Is that?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. If it is traumatic stress, secondary traumatic stress, you want to get some support. There's no question. Yeah. Um, yeah. And, if this is resonating, again, investigating further, deeper training. I'm not trying to sell the program. I believe in it wholeheartedly, but finding ways, including, as you said, Kate, so for anyone who's still listening, Insight Timer, I don't work for them, so I can say it's a wonderful app to have on your phone because you have it with you all the time. And these other websites I've said are wonderful too, and but Insight Timer has some self-compassion practice practices. So if you know, and it's free other than you can sign up for an upgraded one. So there's lots of ways of deepening into mindfulness and self-care and self-compassion that don't cost money too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think that did speak, your answers spoke to, they were kind of giving some more insight. So, and that they
Good.
are speaking to someone about burnout. And so I think that's really meaningful. And just to close, yeah, lots of very helpful about deepening their own practice and around self-compassion and kindness and thank yous. And that this was very much landing. So thank you for all of you that have stayed on a little longer today to answer some questions and sometimes, you know, learning sparks in this kind of discussion, and also knowing, you know, there was 73 people here today. There is a common humanity aspect of caregiving and the challenges with caregiving, the silver linings of caregiving, and also taking that respite to be able, and as short as you can, and I love what you said, being able to do it you know, in a moment of just checking in can sometimes be super powerful.
Yeah, absolutely, Kate. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for asking me, and thank you to each one of you. I wish I could
Mm,
see you all, but thank you for coming. This is work that's meaningful to me, and I honor what you do every day. So, yeah, may you be well.
thank you. And so the recording will be up. You'll get an email tomorrow. The survey will be there with the resources. And again, we thank you for your time and your teaching this morning, Patricia. I'm so grateful to have you here. And yes, the slides will be available with it, and it will all be there on our website shortly. So please stay tuned. And thank you.
Yeah. Thank
And
you, Kate. Yeah. Okay.
okay,
Okay.
bye.
Bye.